Welcome to Inside Politics with Kevin Klein, beyond the headlines, beyond the spin. Straight facts, sharp analysis, and common sense conversation you won't hear anywhere else. Let's get started.
Welcome to another edition of Inside Politics. I'm Kevin Klein. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues from the Winnipeg Sun. We have Jeff Currier and Royce Koup, who is also a professor of political science at the University of Manitoba. Gentlemen, let's talk about the G7 summit that happened here in Canada. There was lots of fanfare, lots of media coverage, but I think very little of anything out of it. Am I right or wrong?
Usually there's a joint communique that comes out of these meetings, some kind of a joint statement. It might be vague, it might be wishy-washy, but there's usually some kind of a joint communique. But I don't know that very much came out of this, really.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that Carney can get along with Trump when he wants to. The elbows up prime minister, the elbows up campaigner can still negotiate, can still get along, can still put on a cooperative face. But just a few days after those meetings between Carney and Trump, we saw there's more retaliatory tariffs coming. The tariff situation is as bad as it ever has been between Canada and the United States. So any negotiations weren't a success. Unfortunately, I think the opportunity has been squandered by the Prime Minister, unfortunately.
Well, he took a lot of heat from some people online for, being nice to Trump, and but that's something you have to do as the host country, right? I mean, politics aside, he was the host of the G7 summit. That's not a place for him to, be attacking Trump or getting into political fights and that sort of thing. He's there to be a good host. And I thought that he at least acted as a good host. But I agree with you. I didn't see the whole tariff situation. They did talk about it a little bit. Trump talked about it with the media and just said, well, hopefully we'll have a plan in 30 days, and it looks like we're getting there. But then, immediately after, now we're hearing about more retaliatory tariffs and some planning to say that in Canada you can only buy, or the government can only buy, Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum, that kind of stuff. Did we expect more from Canada with the European nations? Did you expect more, or did you really see what you wanted to see?
My expectations are generally pretty low for these sorts of things. Uh, but in terms of the separate and apart from our tariff situation with the Americans, and our steel producers are not happy with our retaliatory tariffs, by the way.
Yeah.
They released a statement this week saying that they were not very happy about this, and we've discussed many times. Tariffs are unproductive for everybody. I mean, the only person in the world who thinks tariffs are good is Donald Trump. Nobody with a lick of sense believes that these tariffs are going to actually benefit anybody. But Canada does need to strengthen its ties with the European Union and strengthen its trade ties. And I didn't. There may be something going on there, but it wasn't apparent at these meetings.
Yeah, Carney was the governor of the Bank of England. He travels in these circles. He has no problem with European leaders, and he has been working to strengthen trade ties with Europe in the face of these tariffs from Trump. And we have to give him some credit for that. I was struck by how very little came out of the G7. It's becoming clearer and clearer that these sort of multilateral organizations are less and less important in the face of an American president who basically does whatever he wants to, who does what he sees as being in the best interest of his country without without regard for past relationships, long-standing good trading relationships like the one he has with Canada. So I give Carney credit for his actions in Europe, also for Bill C-5, this Development Act, which has some problems, but he's pushing forward on that. But yeah, for the G7, I didn't think it was a great outcome. I thought it was disappointing. There was an opportunity that was missed.
Let's talk about that Bill C-5. There's a lot of varying opinions out there, and we know you've taken a look at it in some detail. So tell us briefly, give us the Reader's Digest version of your take on it.
Yeah, so C5 is going to give the federal government some extraordinary powers to improve and to approve or to speed up approval of major infrastructure projects, including things like pipelines. Carney has promised that the wait time for some of these things, including the environmental assessments, will go down to 2 years. Some people that are listening to this might say 2 years, that's a long time. Well, you haven't seen how long it takes some of these projects to be approved as is. That would be a huge improvement. And it's really what this country needs right now. We're at a real turning point. It's a critical moment when we are building infrastructure. We should be building infrastructure that we should have built 5, 10 years ago, but we didn't under Justin Trudeau's government. Now, the bill does have critics that worry that the cabinet will be picking projects. Instead of experts, you'll have the cabinet picking projects to move forward on, to push forward. I think there's some legitimate concern about too much power being centralized in the cabinet. That's fine. I don't think those are unreasonable concerns, but I just think this is important at this moment in time. We need to push forward on some of these projects, and that's what he's doing. I'm all in favor.
Well, too much power in cabinet. It really comes down to, and this is a much broader conversation about how power has, beginning with Justin Trudeau's father, that power has become increasingly more centralized. It started out as Parliament governing the country, and then it became cabinet and the Privy Council and the Prime Minister's office, and then it became the Privy Council and the Prime Minister's office, and now it's the Prime Minister's office, and now it's just the Prime Minister governs this country. Parliament doesn't govern Canada anymore. The Prime Minister's office does. Someone quoted to me some years ago that it took us 500 years to get the powers of the king away, and in 50 years we've given all those powers back to the Prime Minister. And in a majority government, now, of course, Mark Carney is in an effective majority government, right? Because either the Conservatives are going to back this bill, and either the Conservatives or the NDP will back whatever legislation he puts forward in the short term, at least. So he is, in effect, governing from a majority position. And whatever the Prime Minister wills to be done is going to be done. So, and I agree with Royce that these infrastructure projects need to be moved along at a much quicker pace than we have been. You have to look at the environmental concerns, of course, but we still do need to move these projects along. So it's a legitimate concern that too much power is centralized in the Prime Minister's office, but that's separate and apart from Bill C-5.
It seems like we've got that problem federally, but we're seeing a little bit of that, I think, in Manitoba. A lot of power seems to be centered around Wab Kinew. Some of the major decisions you see happening and all the talking points and everything is coming out of his office. And recently, I mean, he even spoke about school resource officers, which I think is funny because, at a time I was in charge, the head of the Winnipeg Police Board, and there was a big push to make sure that there was no such thing as uniformed police officers in a school. That people felt that was almost a military state. They were against it. There was all kinds of protests. But then you have the unfortunate incident in Brandon that has brought this up, and I think people need to realize, or need to see, that Wab has changed his stance on it. In my opinion, Royce, what do you think?
Yeah, I thought it was a remarkable statement. I mean, as you said several times, Kevin, Canoe is quite an impressive communicator. And he surprises us sometimes. For school resource officers, it's around 2021 that the Winnipeg School Division, Louis Riel, got rid of these SROs under, I think, it wasn't well justified. They were under pressure from people, and they kind of caved in. And it isn't until a few years later that all of a sudden the person speaking in favor of SROs, really the first, I think, really kind of eloquent voice speaking in favor of them, is the NDP Premier, Wab Kinew, talking about the experiences of his three sons. I think saying what a lot of us already knew, that these SROs, they were big parts of the school communities that they were in. Not only did they contribute to safety, as happened in Brandon, a horrifying story. But they were important parts of school communities. They were positive, supportive. They really contributed, and the end of these programs are a real shame in my view. And it was done not on the base of good arguments. And I think it's remarkable, the comments that the premier made. Now I wonder if he's going to get some pushback from his own party. We saw last week NDP candidate, former Vice President Chris Wiebe, said he left the party because he thinks that Canoe is governing too much like a progressive conservative. It feels like a progressive conservative government. And so there are members of that cabinet that I think would frankly be shocked by Canoe's comments, by the prospect of bringing these back. But it's pretty interesting. The intra-NDP politics right now are an interesting thing, and Canoe has a lot of power within the party. As Jeff points out, Prime Minister, Premier has lots of power, and so Canoe can get away with these sorts of things, I think.
Yeah, I think in Manitoba, the premier governs as the prime minister does. If we go back to when Brian Pallister was premier, for example, that was Brian Pallister's government. That it was his agenda, that it was his direction, that he managed everything down to how many swizzle sticks were in the party cafeteria. He was in control of that sort of thing, and and it doesn't matter what the organization is, and we all understand this, that it's all about leadership. And it doesn't matter what the organization is. If you're running a university or running a newspaper or managing a government or a First Nation, it's all about leadership. And so if Wab Kinew is taking a hold, if he's going to run counter to the wishes of some of the people in his cabinet, he appears to be willing to do that if he is going to move ahead with what he believes is the correct agenda. So, and I think, if I come to the sports analogy, if you look at Walters and O'Shea with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, when they took over that organization, the team was really poor for the first couple of seasons. And even into year 3, it wasn't looking very good. But these two guys said, look, we know what we're doing. And if we're going to get fired, we're going to do it. We're going to get fired doing the things we believe to be correct. Well, as it turns out, they never had to be fired because what they were doing was the correct thing, and they built a dynasty here. And I think that's what you need. Right or wrong, the person at the top has to have the conviction of the decisions that are being made.
Yeah, and I think that he shows that. As I have said before, he is probably the best communicator across the country when it comes to an elected official. He uses his abilities to his advantage all the time and is always in front of the positive news or in front of the messaging. However, there was some messaging that came out from Shared Health here in Manitoba and the University of Manitoba that showed some systemic racism in our ERs that I really took me back because I thought this is not respectful to the staff in the ERs. This is not the headlines that I think we wanted or that we want to see in our province, where they're saying that Black and Indigenous people tend to have longer wait times in an emergency room. Because, I did my research on it. I've got a column in the Winnipeg Sun about it. Obviously, ERs are set up under a triage system. They follow a medical system, and that's how people are seen. We don't know what's happening in the background. And I think that this is one area where Kinew dropped the ball, because Kinew should be coming out right away and saying, look, we're not saying that our staff are racist. This is the data that was found. And let's talk about how that data was collected, because I really think it was unfair to the staff at our ERs to come out and say what they said.
Well, I'm a little bit unclear as to whether or not they're talking about emergency rooms or urgent care facilities, because those are two very different animals. And a lot of people, as we know, particularly at Health Sciences Center, show up in the emergency room with non-emergency situations. Emergencies are things like strokes, heart attacks, serious accidents, that kind of thing. That's emergency. The rest of us should be going to urgent care clinics or walk-ins. And so we need to make those distinctions. But it was a surprising report. I think it raised a lot of eyebrows, because if you go into any of those facilities, whether it's an ER or an urgent care clinic, anywhere in Manitoba, you're going to see a lot of mixed ethnicity amongst the peoples who are doing those triages. And so I think it was surprising. It was eyebrow raising, at the very least. Royce, I don't know what you made of this report, but it made me go, really?
Before you go, Royce, I think it made a lot of people uncomfortable because I think they were making the statement, and you said it right off the start. You weren't sure if the data was talking about ERs or it was talking about urgent cares. And when they call, apparently they would call people who left, right? Because that was part of the data they collected is people that would leave the ER without being seen. I mean, they were
Okay, if
allowed
you've
to.
left the ER, you don't have an emergency.
Right. That's the point. But why? So why is that being used in this data? So I think it was irresponsible to put out the data the way that they have. Now, I think it was unfair to the staff and irresponsible because you put out something like that and make a statement such as that to say we have systemic racism in the ERs. That's a bold statement. That's irresponsible. Now, if you're going to make that statement, you better back it up. You better justify it and tell me what you're doing about it.
Yeah, I haven't read the report, so I'd be reluctant to kind of criticize the method. But with academic research, especially if it's going to be publicized, in the news, if it's going to try to affect public policy, like it sounds like this one is, you have to be able to communicate what you've done in a way that's persuasive, in a way that, you could take into a Tim Hortons and everyone would be able to understand and would be convinced by it. And it sounds like there's room for improvement here. I do think that an interesting thing in Manitoba right now has been the tension between the government and nurses in the province that we've seen over the last couple of months. That's been something that's been surprising. And if to the extent that this report could aggravate that, it might be something the government wants to get on top of, even if these results are valid. If I was the premier, I said, look, we've got great nurses in this province, and if there's problems, we want to address them, but we don't want to leave the impression, a negative impression of nurses in Manitoba. They work enormously hard, and they're caring in the most challenging circumstances in this province. I wouldn't just let it hang out there if I was the government.
And would you say wouldn't you say? I mean, I wrote a column a long time ago about the nurses union being one of those unions that I felt was very supportive of the NDP to get elected during the
Yeah,
campaign, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and it hasn't been the election wasn't that long ago.
No,
Uh,
and they were very supportive, and I did call the Manitoba Nurses Union for comment. They didn't want to comment because they were upset at me for my column saying that they were supportive of the NDP in the election. They said that that was false. That wasn't the reality. They were simply informing people, and I said you had signs all over the place, and all of this. Well, yes, but that wasn't that. We will work with any government, but I did call them to get a comment on that. So to be fair, and she didn't want to talk to me about it. And that's fair. I mean, everybody has their own opinion. That doesn't bother me at all, but it doesn't change the fact that I think it's irresponsible. And I'm shocked by this because Wam Kanu is such a good communicator that this wouldn't have gone through him first. And maybe that was something maybe he should have communicated better, or something that they should have reviewed a little bit further because I think it sends a really nasty message. I know I talked to one nurse that was in an ER, and immediately said people were talking about it and were shocked,
oh, really?
shocked. They were shocked. But look at all the media headlines, including us in the Sun. The media headlines called it out, right? Black and indigenous people have wait longer times in ERs where data shows. You need to show everything. You need to have a better conversation before you start making those bold statements.
Yeah, I tend to, I mean, rightly or wrongly, fairly or not, I tend to draw a distinction between our nurses and the nurses union. I think of them as being two completely divergent and separate entities because, as we've said, our nurses do incredible work. They work extremely hard. They work long hours, all that stuff. The nurses union has, to a great extent, been one of the major players in how our health system functions in Manitoba, and first, there's no. I mean, for them to say that they didn't support the NDP, I mean that's pretty disingenuous, right? I mean that's strange credulity, folks. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they have every right to engage in kind of education or activism campaigns during election campaigns. It is interesting. As I said, the election isn't that far away, and yet we've seen major strain between Nurses Union, which is big ally of the NDP. It's not
Be careful. Be
the
careful.
No.
Be careful. They don't like
Uh,
that.
Well, I mean, it showed, you can take it as a critique of the NDP. I think this is just dealing with healthcare issues in this province that's going to be challenging no matter who's in government. In the absence of real transformational change, actors like the or the nurses union are almost always going to be disappointed.
Yeah. And at the time of this taping, I've seen no comment out of the nurses union about the data
Hmm.
or about the findings. I haven't, anyways. I did, as I said, try to get comment from the president of the nurses union, but they refused to talk to me about it. But I would have thought they would have come out to support the nurses, to support their members right away. Because I think that it goes back to what Jeff said and what you said, Royce. These are pretty hardworking staff, and they're working long hours. They're in the front lines of our life. Everything that's going. They see everybody at the worst possible time in their life. Everybody's, when you're sick, you're not feeling well. They have to deal with so much, and we don't see what's going on behind the scenes. You don't see the number of ambulances and paramedics that are coming in with stretchers, or with heart attack victims, or whatever. And like you said, Jeff, if you left an ER, you didn't need to be at an ER. That's the simple point. If you left an ER, you shouldn't have been at an ER. Now, some of that is because people say they can't get a doctor, but they could wait at a walk-in clinic, or they could wait at an urgent care facility. So again, I would like to see where that data was collected and how it was collected.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I haven't seen the report. I mean, I just assume that research done by University of Manitoba researchers is going to be good. But I mean, in part, high quality research. But what we're talking about here is really the communication of the results and some of the political and professional implications of those findings. And yeah, I could see how nurses would be affected by these sorts of things. And the premier, I mean, it's not the premier does have his hands on a lot of things in the government, and so I would hope that he would provide some sort of comment on it as it relates to nurses, and they do great work in this province.
Yeah. Well, in my column, I've suggested or hinted at the fact it would be nice if he would apologize or come out and say what's really going on. Come out and give us the data and tell us what's really going on. Anyways, interesting week in politics. We'll have more next week. Thank you very much for joining me on this edition of Inside Politics. Please make sure you like, share, and follow our YouTube page.
Thanks for watching Inside Politics with Kevin Klein. Please like and subscribe to this channel and visit thewinnipegsun.com for more.